Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Introspection. I'm your host, Amy Lindner-Lesser, and I am so excited to have my guest today, Deb Decelle, who is a trauma-informed intuitive medium. And we're going to go into what does that mean. She's also a mentor and best-selling author. She's worked with clients across the globe, facilitating meaningful connections with the spirit world. And she teaches others to tap into their own inner intuitive wisdom. She's passionate about helping others navigate their grief in a way that fosters continued relationships even after death. And she's a contributing author, one of my co-authors, to the international bestseller, The Grief Experience: Tools for Acceptance, Resilience, and Connection. So join me in welcoming Deb. Welcome to Introspection, the podcast about moving from grief to growth. I'm Amy Lindner-Lesser, your host. Introspection started out as a podcast about hospitality, innkeeping, and innkeepers. After about a year, I realized that my life and interests have morphed from hospitality to helping others navigate from grief and loss to growth and living. In this new version of Introspection, I will be talking about my personal experiences with loss, and there are quite a few, what I've learned along the way through my professional training, as well as from my coaching experiences. I'll also be bringing in guests to share interesting ideas. So grab a beverage, find a comfy place, take a deep breath, and listen in.
Hi, Amy. It's great to be here.
Hi, Deb. Thank you so much for agreeing to come talk to my listeners and viewers. It's exciting to have you here.
Wonderful.
So I'm going to start by asking you to sort of unpack the words trauma-informed intuitive medium. What exactly does it mean?
Absolutely. Well, prior to doing mediumship full time, I worked in education for almost 15 years. When I worked in education, I worked in special education. I also worked in behavior special education, and I worked with at-risk youth. And when you work with those populations, you're trained in something called therapeutic crisis intervention. And what it really did was gave me awareness of triggers, awareness of proper language, awareness of de-escalation and things like that. So really, working in education, it gave me that lens, and it gave me the ability to really do things in a different and a trauma-informed way. And so what exactly is that? Well, when I'm meeting with clients and doing sessions and things of that nature, you'll hear some mediums say, "Oh, well, I had to deliver it because spirit said." Well, we are souls having a human experience, and through that vein, the human needs to come first. So the way that we phrase things, the words that we use, the things that we say are really important, because what can happen is when we're spending time with folks who are active in their grief, we can do a lot of damage by saying the wrong things. And so having that trauma-informed lens is really critical to serving my client population.
The fact that as a society, and I really can't talk of any other society other than the US, even though I've experienced others, this is my home society. We are so phobic and afraid of grief and afraid of, I don't want to say bad emotions, because I don't believe emotions are good or bad, but they're difficult emotions. The ones that make us sad or grief or depressed or angry, that we as the rest of society do almost anything to protect ourselves from having to experience somebody else going through it.
Absolutely.
And what I found was that, those of us who are in the grief world, in the grief helping world, I'll put it, understand that going through grief is a trauma. And you can't just put a pretty little Band-Aid on it and make it go away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so that makes really the words that we use so, so important because, when people are, through me seeking reading, seeking solace, seeking connection with the other side, that's so critically important. And it's such an honor for me to do that. But also, I need to have that critically important education about what trauma is, about what triggers are, about what to say and not to say. And so it becomes something that's so important, which I like to term marrying my muggle, if you will, with my magical. So I have this non-magic part of my life, my work in education, my college degrees, all of those kinds of things. And now I have really blended it with the mediumship that I do so that I can be a more effective communicator and hold space for people in a more trauma-informed way.
That's wonderful. As somebody who is coming into starting to use more spiritual practices such as Reiki to help
Mhm.
people move through grief, I think it's fabulous that you have this whole other arsenal, if you will, to help people.
Absolutely.
How did you first find out that you had the skill, the gift of mediumship? And is it a skill or a gift or both?
Well, actually, it's a little bit of both. And what I want to share, which I think is really important, is that really everybody has the ability to connect with the other side. Everybody has the ability to connect intuitively. We're born on this planet with that ability. But what happens is as time goes on and we enter school and all of those kinds of things, it's kind of shut off a little bit and then it's shut off a little bit more and shut off a little bit more, and so we just don't have a huge awareness of it on the front end. When I had my first intuitive experience, I didn't really know what that was. I was just shy of 7. My maternal grandmother had passed, and I had an experience sitting in my walk-in closet one day, and I had my blanket and I was like chanting the name of my blanket over and over again. And I talk about this a little bit in the grief experience. And the next thing I knew, I was kind of outside of my body. I had connection with her. And then I'm not sure how long it was because, as little, I didn't really have a concept of time. But I knew that I had felt her energy, that I had experienced her. And so time went on and that didn't happen again. Certainly, I knew intuitive things. I always knew when people were lying to me, those sorts of things. And it could be a real challenge because, growing up a Gen Xer, you didn't dare question an adult. You didn't dare talk back. You didn't dare speak a certain way to other adults. And so I kind of just turned all of that inward. I did not start true what I would consider development until I was in my 30s. And so I started studying energy work and I found that that opened me up more. And then the messages started coming faster and faster. And I knew I needed to do something with it to help other people heal. Part of why it was such a challenge for me is because my primary sense is what's known as claircognizance. So it's just really primarily an overwhelming knowing. Okay. So it's not like, oh, I say dead people and I feel like someone's standing right there, or, I'm hearing things. For me, it was just that overwhelming knowing. And so for many years, I thought to myself, oh, is that my own thought or what's happening? So I didn't really start to sift that out, I guess, until I was in my 30s. And then I really knew that as those messages started coming faster and faster, I knew that it was my soul's purpose to help other people heal and to help other people navigate the intuitive world, especially in their grief. I have. I have. And there's several other clairs. Sometimes I am clairaudient where I'll hear things, but it's more in my mind's ear as opposed to externally. I have heard things externally a couple times, and whoo, it made me shiver a little bit. My clairvoyant abilities have picked up quite a bit in that I see things in my mind's eye. And so I'm really quite comfortable with all the clairs. So, we have clear seeing, clear feeling, clear touching, clear empathy, feeling the emotions of other people. And there are other clairs out there. But as you said, as you grow and you develop, you find that you start to branch out into those other senses, and it can be really exciting. And I also find that really with my clairs, sometimes I work in certain ways, and other times it kind of switches around and changes up. So it's always a neat way to grow and expand, to try to work with those other clair senses.
Can you give us an idea of what it's like working with somebody? For example, when would somebody come to you? What are they looking for? And then how you work with them.
Okay, perfect. Well, a couple of things. When I have people come to me for mediumship readings, sometimes it's with people that their grief is relatively new, a few months, a year, that kind of thing. Some people, it's been many years. But the need really, when people are coming to me for mediumship, is the same. They want that connection with the otherworldly. They want that connection with their loved one. And one of the most important tools to provide that to people is what we like to call evidence. So, what are the things that you come up with that help others know that their loved one is right there with you? Now, in addition to that piece of it, I also work intuitively. So, not only just talking to people from the spirit world, but also helping people on their life path, helping people develop their own intuition, helping people to leverage their intuition in business. So, there's a lot of different ways in which I work. But when I'm working mediumistically with people in grief, they'll come to me, and what I do is we chat for a few minutes. I share with them the way I work, because every medium on the planet is different. Okay. And then what I do is I'll do just a short little kind of invocation to join our energies. And then we'll move forward with the reading. And so what happens when I'm doing a reading for people? Generally, it's an overwhelming knowing of a presence being there. And so I get what I like to call downloads from spirit. So say their loved one is coming in, I'm picking up on, who they are, their energy, maybe what they did for a living, just a lot of different details. Okay. And then I can then pass that along to my sitter. And when I read for people, I always let them know I tend to not look directly at them, because it keeps me in the part of my brain where I'm not adding my own logic. So I'm just letting spirit kind of flow through, so that I can then pass along information, and not just evidence that life after death is real, but also messages from their loved ones. And I feel like that's so critically important for people to be able to have that communication in that context.
Life quakes or life transitions and the aftershocks that follow are something we all experience. A life quake can stem from the heartbreaking grief that arises from the loss of a loved one, or the disorientation felt when life suddenly shifts due to the loss of a job, relationship, identity, or health challenge. Learning to navigate these transitions with mindfulness, grace, and self-compassion is the key to finding your way back to joy, happiness, and inner peace. Advanced Grief Recovery Method Specialist and Certified Life Transition Coach, Amy Lindner-Lesser, MSW, expertly supports clients to navigate their life quakes and transitions with warmth, kindness, and grace. Learning to accept support as you navigate your way through the aftershocks is one of the most powerful gifts you can give yourself. Learn more at introspection.com. That's introspection.com.
I know that you were talking earlier about we all have the abilities and we're born with them, and they sort of disappear or dissipate as we age, and society tells us it's crazy, it's wrong, it's whatever. And so if you look at children, you can talk to a child who can tell you that they had a conversation with somebody who had passed on, or they saw so and so. And it's amazing that it's there, and yet it's so hard to get back to it. And also with animals. I know my cats, not so much my dog, but my cats will be in my bedroom, which is where they live, and be staring up at the ceiling. And I'm like, okay, who's there? Give me the message. We know somebody is there. Why are they here? What do they want to tell me? And I have clairsentience. Don't know why I'm getting the download, but I get downloads. Mine are all about me. They're not, I don't have the ability to read for anybody else. However, and I had never heard until you said it of empathy being one of the clairs.
Yeah.
I used to never be able to understand why I would walk in a room and all of a sudden have a complete change in my emotions. Like when I owned my inn, I would walk into the kitchen in the morning, and we're talking 6:37 in the morning. There's nobody in there except my assistant. And all of a sudden I'd be banging things around. I'd be angry. And I'm like, what is going on? And I realized that I was picking up her energies. And I was like, oh, okay, go back. I don't want it.
Yeah,
Clear it off
absolutely.
me. Go away.
And so that's you as a grown woman. Imagine children in a classroom. Imagine in education when, we have a student that can't multitask. They're not paying attention. They're not focused. They're looking around the room. Well, 8 times out of 10, they're picking up on the frequency and the vibration of everything else in the classroom. They're feeling what the teacher's feeling and what their students are feeling, in all of those kinds of things. And so it does become very hard for students to focus. So, even as a grown woman, you had the insight to be like, oh, wait a second, these aren't my feelings. We're still in a culture where children, to a certain extent, are relatively powerless. And so, if they're not paying attention in the classroom because they're distracted by this, that, or the next thing, we always look at, oh, well, they have ADHD, or, oh, they can't pay attention, or, oh, they this, or, oh, they that. When the reality is they have all these little magical spidey senses that are picking up on everything at all times and trying to process.
There's a great movie out right now. I don't know if you've seen it or if our viewers have, called IF. IF. And it stands for imaginary friend. And it talks all about, in a humorous way and also a serious way, about how as children we have all these imaginary friends, and then we grow out of them. That we're told that it's not the right thing to do. So I want to encourage our viewers to watch it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely am going to have to check that out.
Yeah, I hope it's still in the movies. It may not be. But, I went thinking it was going to be just some silly thing, having no idea that IF stood for imaginary friend. And I absolutely loved it. And maybe it's because I'm so fascinated with the idea of being able to communicate with family and friends who have passed on,
Absolutely.
that I knew always that there had to be more.
Yes, 100%. And how wonderful that realization is coming out now in mainstream media. So, we're having that awareness, coming out into the world. And, it's something that's so super important in so many ways. And, one of the worst things that we can say to somebody is, oh, that's just your imagination. Okay. And I'm not suggesting that we live in a world of delusion or something that's unhealthy, but to shut down imaginary friends, different things like that, it really can do a disservice. And it shuts down those intuitive abilities at a very young age.
It's very true. And does it matter if we're talking to someone who was real, if you will, or if it is somebody who's imaginary? if whatever or whoever it is providing good advice, um, some stability for someone, the answers to questions. You know, I used to say when my husband was alive and we were running the inn, I would go to him and I'd say, I'm thinking about doing this, this, and this. What do you think? Never giving him the opportunity to say a word. I needed to hear myself. And then I'd say, okay, good, let's do it. In many ways, he's still doing that for me now. That I talk to him almost 25 years later, and it's still like, what's going on? It doesn't matter if he never existed, and I have that sounding board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's interesting because we hear people talk about it, and this is not tied to religion, it's spirituality. We have people talk about angels watching over, or guides or guardians, things like that. And some of those beings are not ones that have existed here in the physical world, that are attached to us genetically as family. Yet they provide knowingness, people that have an idea of God of any kind, regardless of who it is. Okay. It's about having that personal connection, being able to connect with the unseen, being able to process and look at things in a different and unique way based on them either being a sounding board like your husband, or them giving us what I like to call signs, kind of asking questions saying, okay, if I'm meant to move forward, please send me a sign. Okay, there are ways that we can navigate our human world and integrate the intuitive world with it.
What I learned from reading, and you could tell me if this is true if I took the information, was that if we want a sign, it's best to ask for a specific sign, not say, give me a sign, because then you don't really know if it's a sign or you're imagining it or whatever.
Absolutely.
After I moved here, on the first birthday that I spent here, 2 deer came into my backyard. And I just assumed that they were from my husband, and, because maybe they were dear to me. And then I didn't see them for months. So it wasn't like it was a common thing. So now I'll say to him, I haven't seen a sign from you in a long time, and I need to know you're still around. Send me a deer. And I'll get a deer. And right after my best friend died, there were 2 deer who came. So, I said, okay, that's Steve and Liz. They're here, and they're here together to support me.
I love that. I love that. And, it's interesting. You bring up an interesting point because, I know there are some people that are just like, give me some kind of sign, and some people that are very specific. And I feel like both have equal value, and what's interesting to me too, is that one of the most important things about what you just said was that it's two-way communication between us and the spirit world. It's not just the spirit world making things happen and us trying to figure it out. Okay. It's a two-way conversation. And so, yes, you can be very specific with them. I actually have a client of mine who asked her mom for, and this is just, it blows my mind every time. Let me ask you this first. Have you ever seen a cardinal feather on the ground ever?
No. But I talk to all the cardinals who fly into my yard. And if they're male cardinals, I identify them either as my husband, my father, or one of my grandfathers. And if they're females, they're my mother, my best friend, or a grandmother.
I love it. But the beautiful thing is, this particular client asked her mother to send her red feathers. She has a whole collection of cardinal feathers that she and her little daughter find all the time. And it is just mind-boggling to me because she set up something very specific and her mom delivers every time. And so, I love that you brought that point up because there is duality. There is back and forth between us and the spirit world. It's not just one-way communication. And so I think that there's a lot of value in us discussing that. For me, one of my signs, one of the things for me is, okay, I'm considering this, do I need to move forward with it? If it is, show me a hawk. And inevitably, I will have a red-tailed hawk either swoop down in front of my car, or I'll see it in the air, or it'll be in a picture or photograph. So I love too when we can get playful, when we can set expectations, and I love that you've said kind of to the spirit world, okay, let me know you're okay. Let me know you're around. Show me a deer. So I love that you're very specific in your pursuit of signs. I also do know people, though, that are more general and still have signs show up as well.
I guess if you think that it's a sign, it's a sign. That's sort of using clairsentience.
Yes, absolutely. It's that clear sensing that in having that awareness, being able to translate from the spirit world. People ask me, okay, what is it like to do a reading? Well, sometimes it's a bit like charades or Pictionary, where you're trying to, translate and figure out and things like that. So the clearer you can be, the better. And so, the concept and the construct of specific signs is absolutely amazing. But also other signs from people maybe that aren't as direct, but you're just saying, okay, give me some kind of sign, and within minutes or seconds something comes through. I think that has equal value. But I love that when we can really get playful with the spirit world as well, because they love to give us signs. They love to show up for us in unique ways. I actually just had I was flying back from Colorado from teaching, and I was on the airplane, and someone had messaged me, and I went to look at their profile. And so I started to type in their first name. And so in the little box comes up my mother's first and last name. And the other part of that is the first time I was ever on an airplane, I was 2 years old, and we were flying. We were flying to Nebraska to see my mom's family. And so, I'm on an airplane, getting ready to fly. I'm looking this up, and mom's name comes in the drop down menu. You don't get much more specific than that. It was such a beautiful and precious moment to me to know that she was there with me.
And I had an experience this past year. I got into my car, started driving, and my cell phone rang on the car display. And I looked, and it was my best friend's phone number. She's been gone for two years. I'm like, I know that it wasn't her, but it was. She was definitely giving me a message that, hi.
Hi, I'm around. And I love that. I love, love, love that. It just excites me. And it's so funny because you would think that having done this professionally, that I'd be like, oh yeah, or that would be commonplace to me. But I still absolutely marvel when spirit comes through with really clear information, wisdom, signs, things like that. Because when I'm working with people, when I'm doing readings, I'm the conduit. So I'm the cell phone, but I'm not the voice. That's their job. And so for me, am I a clear conduit? Yes. But for me, the wisdom, the appreciation, the glory all belongs up there, because they're the ones that are working to communicate. They're the ones that are downloading the clearest information possible. Because when we work in the realm of spirit, their energetic vibration is up here and we're down here. And so in order to make it work, they have to drop a little bit and we have to elevate our frequency a bit in order for that communication to happen. And so, when we get those super clear pieces of evidence, when we get those super clear signs, sometimes I think people think I'm a bit nerdy because it still blows my hair back and makes me want to like clap and jump like a little kid because it's so exciting to me. And it's just, there's so many amazing things about it.
Can you explain a little bit about how we can bring our vibration up to meet a spirit's vibration?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting because I had mentioned before that everybody can connect with the spirit world. So what are the ways in which we do that? Well, You can, do meditation. And I know for some people that's a challenge because they say, oh my gosh, I have monkey brain. I can't get it to stop. Okay. But what I want to bring into people's awareness is that what is meditative for some people may not be for other people. And so, I've had clients that I'm working with and we're looking to give them stronger connection to the spirit world. And they're like, this whole meditation thing isn't working for me. And then they break into their own rhythm. I have one person I've worked with throwing on some Led Zeppelin really loud. He is in the zone like that and connects like crazy. Somebody else, it might be walking through the forest. So when I say meditation, it doesn't necessarily mean sitting cross-legged on a mountaintop saying Om. Okay. It could be sitting on your living room floor or walking in the woods. It's about being fully present. So being aware of the things that you're hearing, being aware of the things that you're smelling or sensing or feeling, so that you can raise your vibration, your frequency. Because what happens is when we get stuck kind of in the muggle world, in the human stuff, and our brain is thinking about yesterday and 5 years ago and 20 years ago and tomorrow and 3 years from now and 10 years from now, we're not able to be present. And presence is really where it's at, because that's what raises the frequency. Now, in the grief experience, I do talk about the tools that I utilize to help people with better connection. One of them is to do what's called a progressive relaxation. And there's a recording of that. If people want to head to my website, debdecelle.com, they can click on the grief experience and that's available. But progressive muscle relaxation is a tightening and a releasing of each of the muscles in our body. And so that gets us into our physical body first, which is really important because, we're on these little magical boxes all day and computers. And so our energy isn't what I like to call grounded. So we're kind of way up here and not present. So when we're able to use progressive muscle relaxation to become present in our body, then that allows us to begin to think about connection with the spirit world, the spiritual world. Okay. So it's about frequency and intention.
Mindfulness, being present, as well as the progressive muscle relaxing and tensing are all also good ways for people who can't fall asleep to relax, to be able to fall asleep. And I'm guessing that just before sleep is probably a great time to connect because you're relaxed, you're ready, you're not fighting, you're not thinking about anything else. And one of the things that I noticed through both my own experiences and talking to so many people who are in the midst of grief is that we tend not to dream. We tend not to really let ourselves relax enough. And we do dream, we just don't remember them. But if we're not allowing ourselves to relax enough and to be present enough, then we can't dream, which means we're not allowing ourselves to be able to move forward in our lives. You know, and so I love that you're giving that example.
Well, the thing that's interesting to me too, Amy, that you just mentioned was, that state right before we go to sleep. And for some people, that's their sweet spot. For some people, that is where divine connection is at. And especially, if your grief is really fresh, is really new, that time of day can really be helpful. I know for other people, they can be frustrated because that is their sweet spot and they're trying to go to sleep and they don't want to forget and all of those kinds of things. So it's kind of like, oh, I want connection when I'm more alert, when I'm more awake, when I'm more aware. And so it's really interesting because you're right. That is a really wonderful receptive state. And it's a double-edged sword because for some people it's blissful and it's like, oh, I can rest now. And for other people, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to forget. And all this information is flooding in and I want to write it down and I want to record it. And so it can be challenging too. But the beautiful thing is that everybody connects differently. And so, for some people, that state, that realm right before sleep is their perfect sweet spot. And it can be such a gift and such a blessing. And for other people, they may be able to, if they practice and things, find that they can drop into that state during the waking hours so that they can, record or jot down thoughts and things like that. The connection either way is so incredibly valuable for people to continue relationship with those in spirit. And something else that's really interesting that comes to mind is that sometimes our relationship with people when they're here in the physical world can be really complicated and really complex. And there's a lot of emotion behind it. And I will tell you that sometimes when that's the case, that loved one may come through with 360-degree wisdom and the ability to see where their shortcomings were here in the physical world, and also having an even better relationship with their loved one than when they were here in the physical world. And I know for me, that's very true of my relationship with my dad. We had a very complicated relationship. And, certainly we made peace before he transitioned. But at the same time, I find that he's more of an advocate and a cheerleader for me from the spirit world than he was here in the physical world, because his human brain kind of got in the way. But now, biggest advocate, biggest cheerleader, has sent me so many resources in such a variety of different ways. And I feel like that can be very surprising for people, but also that takes us back to that trauma-informed mediumship. Because what happens when someone's relative comes through and things were really complicated or abusive and they don't want to hear from them, what happens? Well, for me, when someone comes through like that, often they'll just stand. I'll have a visual of them just kind of standing with their head hung. And then they let me know there was regret when they were here in the physical world. And then they'll simply leave. Okay. But I want to take it a step further because this is so important. People that are having a reading need to feel like they're in control, because they are. And so when I sit down with someone to do a reading, I will say to them, if I start to head in a direction that you're not comfortable with, that you don't want to talk about, or someone that you don't want to hear from, you can just raise your hands and say to me, mm-mm. Or, I might give them a safe word. So, if something starts to come up that they don't want to address, they can say that word to me. And without question, I shut down that part of the reading. And that is so critically important to be trauma informed, because we don't know what people have experienced with their mom, their dad, their grandfather, their brother, their uncle. Okay. We don't know that. All right. And it is unethical for us to tap in without permission. And so we really want to give the sitter, the client, the ability to say, oh, I'm not ready to hear this yet. Okay. Because I'm not a trained therapist. And I want to be able to bring people peace. And to do that in the most trauma-informed way is so, so critical.
What kept coming up for me during that was that my understanding is that when somebody transitions, their ego is gone. And so they can be more understanding, more compassionate, more sorry for their behaviors during their lifetime. And that was very helpful for me, because I had a mother who I did love, and I know at some way she loved me. She was a narcissist. And so once I hit adolescence, there was very little room for Amy. It was all my mother. And the relationship was very difficult. And since she's transitioned, I've had readings where she's come through and has apologized. And that, and it's like, okay, you did the best you could. There was something going on. I don't need to know the trauma she went through to be able to say, I forgive you for what happened in this lifetime, and let's have a better relationship. You also talked about, I believe, soul families, that we come back with with the same people, if I understand that, maybe different relationships.
Yeah, and that's something that can happen where it's almost like, you have people in your life that are familiar and you're like, "Oh, I've known you from before." Or, "Oh, your energy is familiar to me." Okay? And so having, soul family that maybe you're not genetically related to can show up in your life. And so what does that look like? Well, you meet someone kind of out of the blue and you guys become super tight right away. It's almost like, God, when people say, "I feel like I've known you forever," it's that kind of feeling, that kind of sensation. So we do have groupings of soul families and families kind of from the other side. And also, we have people that we've known in other lifetimes, at least that's my belief, that show up for us, in this lifetime. And so that can be really interesting because it happens in a positive way, but it can also happen in a negative way where it's kind of like, "Oh, why do I keep choosing people that are narcissists? Or why do I keep choosing people that are abusive? Or why do I keep finding myself in toxic places, toxic relationships?" And it's like the universe is trying to kind of get you to learn the lesson. And I just want to add one caveat to that because that kind of sounded a little insensitive. No one chooses to be in abusive relationships. No one chooses to consistently show up or want to be in a bad way like that, not consciously. So I want to just clear the air on that because that was a little sticky to me. But certainly we find that the same lessons will show up over and over for us again and again until we've learned that lesson and made peace with it.
We've been talking about it. I also love that the idea of people having, whether it's their tribe or their guides or their council or whoever it is, a group of advisors, who could be made up of people who had been alive and have now transitioned, or as one of my friends says, are more than alive.
Uh-huh.
It could be people we don't know. You mentioned angels and other, I'm going to call them characters. Um, that they don't have to be humans.
And one of the things that really shows up time and time again as well is not only spirit guides, so they could be that people, that loved ones that you've known, but also people that haven't lived here in the physical world, or at least not in your lifetime. But also spirit animals are something that is so powerful. And one of the things that I do with clients is lead them through meditations and things like that, so that they have an opportunity to connect with a spirit guide, to connect with a spirit animal. And, that animal energy is something that can be so incredibly powerful. For me, the first time I did kind of a meditation about spirit animals, endeavoring to find out what mine were, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'll get a hawk or an eagle or a fox or something cool." I got a giant, wet, slobbering buffalo. And so I was like, "Darn it, I wanted something cool." But then I realized, I did the research and I did some reading, how cool having a buffalo really is. And so having a team or a council of people or beings in spirit is something that's really important. And people need to realize that that's something that everybody has access to. And it's a really interesting construct because I have a spirit guide who now has started showing up in my mentoring sessions with clients to support them as well. And so it's really interesting because even after we're not working together, or we're during the week between sessions and things, they're like, "Hey, I saw this number," which we know represents this individual. And so it's really interesting how spirit teams, spirit guides, and things like that can also get playful to reach out and work with other people in your world.
You brought up the fact or the point about numbers and what do numbers mean? Like if you keep see the same numbers, like I will often see my birthday. I will see my anniversary. And it's like, okay, or oh, it's 11/11.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so fun because we're humans, and so there are some things we're great at and some things not so much. And I've always really tried to do numerology, but it's just not my sweet spot. So what I do when I start to see patterns of numbers is I grab this magical little box here and I just Google it. And it's really the patterns are about letting you know that divine support is with you in that moment. Whether it's a special number, yours and your husband's anniversary, whether it's 11/11, 1/11, 2/22, 3/33, 4/44, all of those have their own individual significant meanings. And we're in an informational age where we can pick up that magical little rectangle and find out in seconds exactly what it means. Okay. But the overarching theme is it's almost like a God wink. It's kind of like, hey, your spirit team is here. Hey, we see you. Hey, you're on the right track. And so it's
Hey,
really,
you're not alone.
yes, 100%, because it's really important for us to know that, especially now. I mean, post COVID, we were also isolated during those few years, and just the knowingness always of not being alone, and actually being able to see things that show up in a physical way, like number patterns, like animals, like different signs and symbols, is something that's so critically important.
And sometimes it doesn't matter if you know what it means, just to notice that it's a pattern. And I have a little notebook that has every time I see a number that I think might mean something. I mean, I do look them up in that little rectangle. However, it's not that important. What's more important is that I've seen, oh, look, here's the number. I'll write it down and then I see it again. Look, I saw it 12 times in the past week.
And that to me is so amazing and such a breath of fresh air, Amy, because not everybody takes the time to do that. And the beauty of that is when we write down the signs, the symbols, the synchronicities, the spirit world is like, oh my gosh, she's paying attention. Yay. And so those start to come more and more and more and more and more because we're acknowledging it. We're excited about it. The spirit world is just as interested in communicating with us as we are with them, because they know they can't pierce through the veil just yet, to be able to communicate directly. So the fact that you kind of track that and keep track of it, and then look it up after, just really makes my heart smile, because it's so important for us to acknowledge the signs and the wisdom that are coming through.
As we grieve, it's especially important to maintain a connection, to feel that your loved one has left you on this plane. They're not gone. We're all energy, and energy doesn't disappear. It just forms in another way. And so, it's around, and we just need to be open to feeling it and seeing it if we can, and knowing that it's there.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's so, so important.
This has been so wonderful. Deb, you mentioned your website. Let's give it to everybody again, because you didn't spell your name, and I think that's important for our viewers to know that.
Absolutely. Okay, so it's www, and it's DebDecelle.com. And on Facebook and Instagram, I'm under Deb Decelle Medium, all lowercase, all one word.
And the book with the exercises that we were talking about is The Grief Experience, and there are more words to it. It's a great book. It's on Amazon. We'll put a link to it. And I'm going to see if we can't take your tool and put it into a document, because I know we have it in something to be able to share if people want to share.
Perfect. Sounds amazing.
Thank you so much. This has been absolutely educational, inspiring. I love that we can talk about afterlife or transitioning or spirit world, whatever somebody wants to call it, and know that we all have the ability to make connections.
Absolutely. And love never dies.
It does not. Thank you so much, Deb. And thank you, listeners, watchers, for joining us today. And we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Thank
Remember,
you.
I love you. If you liked what you heard on this podcast and want to hear more, please follow us and tell your friends. You can also find me on Facebook at Amy Lindner-Lesser, Grief to Growth Life Coaching, and on LinkedIn at Amy Lindner-Lesser. Thanks again for listening.